If I can ask about the schedule for next week to the Majority Leader, and I yield.
I thank you. Gentleman yield. Well, thank you. Let's hope we have just one more colloquy. Maybe not three more colloquies. And on Monday, Mr. Speaker, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. Members are advised that no votes are expected in the House on Monday. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Votes will occur as early as 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday. The House will recess for the Congressional Gold Medal Ceremony to honor the extraordinary courage and fidelity of the U.S. Capitol Police and others who protected the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and allowed us to return to this chamber to confirm the constitutional duty of electing the President of the United States. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 2 p.m. for legislative business. The 2 p.m. convening time, I want to remind people, is because of the funeral of our beloved Don McEachin from Virginia, who sadly died from a long illness, and he will be his funeral will be at 11 o'clock in Virginia, and there will be arrangements for those who want to go to leave from here to go to the funeral in Virginia. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. Next week, the House will consider the Senate amendments to H.R. 8404, the Respect for Marriage Act, which will allow millions of interracial and same-sex couples to be able to live with greater certainty, knowing their right to equal marriage is enshrined in federal law. The House will also consider Senate amendments to H.R. 7776, the James M. Inhofe National Defense Authorization Act for 2023. Additionally, the House will consider two important immigration bills, H.R. 3648, the EAGLE Act, sponsored by Representative Zoe Lofgren, to phase out the per-country cap on employment-based immigrant visas, no increase in the total number, and Representative Takano's H.R. 7946, the Veterans Service Recognition Act. The House will consider bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business today. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and we noticed the Rules Committee has scheduled a hearing on Monday for the National Defense Authorization Act. We still don't have any text for that bill. Obviously, the NDAA is a very important bill to laying out the priorities for our nation's defense, and there's always been a lot of negotiation as it's leaving the House, as it goes to the Senate, as it's been in this conference. There are some issues that are well known that have been debated that hopefully will get resolved in that bill, but there's also talk there may be non-related issues. What I would ask is, when will we be able to get text on this bill? Because the bill is very important to our nation's defense, but if members are going to be asked to vote maybe early next week on the bill, we surely wouldn't want a situation where they don't even see the text until early next week to then be asked to vote on that bill. And I would yield.
Well, I think the gentleman raises obviously which is always an important point, how much time do people have to read the final product of a negotiation? I was hopeful, frankly, that the bill would have been filed today. It's not ready for filing today because there's still some outstanding issues. But I've talked to Mr. Smith, the chairman of the committee, who indicates they are making progress and they're hopeful that they can get this done. So the Rules Committee, I think, notice is going to be subject, obviously, to the completion of negotiations and the filing of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order. I'd like to be able to hear the gentleman's response.
The House will be in order. The gentleman from Maryland.
As I was saying, it's not done, it's not filed today. We need to have it filed as soon as possible. The conferees are working on getting that. As the gentleman points out, this bill tends to be historically, in both sides of aisle where we add a lot of things to it which are not necessarily directly related, but are because this bill is something that we want to pass, and that we do pass, and we'll pass this one, garners riders, if you will, on the bill. So that's still going on, but I'm cognizant, and the gentleman is correct, we want to have sufficient time for members to see the bill. But we would like to do this bill next week if we can, because as the gentleman points out, this is about the national security of our country and our participation in international stabilization efforts around the world, not the least of which, of course, is the unprovoked, illegal war initiated by Mr. Putin in Ukraine. So that we're hopeful we can get this done as soon as possible.
And the gentleman would yield, just would strongly encourage that as the text gets filed, if it's not sometime in the next few hours, that when the gentleman's scheduling for the floor vote on that bill, that there is enough time between when it goes to Rules Committee, when the text is filed, to when the actual vote happens, so members have ample time to review the final product. And if there's anything else on that,
I think that's a good point, and we'll try to make sure that happens.
All right. Final question would be on government funding. We're hearing their negotiations. When we talk to appropriators on our side, they haven't indicated that they've been included in those negotiations. Do we know where those negotiations are? Are all sides going to be included on a final negotiation on how government would be funded for the remainder of the fiscal year?
My expectation there would be four corners discussion, as we've referred to it, with the Republican, Democrat, House, Senate leaders included in those discussions. Unfortunately, as you know, the Senate had not passed any appropriation bill. And there was no agreement on a top line. That's been the discussion. And the difference, as the gentleman probably knows, is discussions about what's the top line for defense discretionary and what's the top line for non-defense discretionary. As I understand it, the parties have started talking in the Senate on that issue. And we're waiting for, I think, agreement, and hopefully that agreement will be reached soon, hopefully as soon as perhaps the beginning of next week, because the gentleman's absolutely correct. On December 16th, the authority to fund the government ends. And we're either going to have to pass a short-term CR, a longer-term CR, or more preferably the omnibus. I will say, as the gentleman knows, he indicated I was returning to the Appropriations Committee. We talk about a CR adversely affects the defense, and it does. You can't plan if you're a manager of any of the programs in the Defense Department. But I would also bring to the attention of members, it harms every agency and department of government. Because it makes them unable to plan on what resources they have available to do the work we've asked them to do by law. And a CR is a very clumsy, frankly, admission of failure to get our job done on time, which I have been very unhappy about for a very, very long period of time. It's an affliction that affects both sides in terms of delay. As I say, the Senate, in the last, and when the Republicans were in charge, and when the Democrats are in charge, haven't really gotten a bill to their floor and gotten it passed. So, but we're not going to shut down the government. So we will propose some action which will preclude shutting down of government at whatever time that action is needed. But I am very, very hopeful that we will do an omnibus, because an omnibus at least gives the government and its agencies a year's worth of notice as to what resources they have to use to accomplish the objectives we have asked them to. I wish I had a more specific answer for you, but as you know, the negotiations are going on about the top line, and hopefully that will be resolved relatively soon.
And a broader discussion for another day, but clearly, as we look at next year, we would hope to pass all 12 appropriations bills out of the House, but as the gentleman points out, at some point the Senate's going to have to start moving appropriations bills too. It can't just be this game of chicken where the clock's going to strike midnight and the Senate won't wait to start doing their job until it's already the midnight hour, as opposed to, you know, it'd be nice if there was some kind of shot clock they had after we send them a bill where they'd actually act on that bill. So that it's not just an onus on the House to do our job, whether it's a partisan or bipartisan bill, and we've seen both that come out of the House. At some point, the Senate's got to also do their job in a legislative body where you have a House and a Senate if we're going to be able to conduct business. That's not always waiting until the midnight hour to finally get a resolution on something as important as this, and I would yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The gentleman's absolutely correct. There is a shot clock. It's September 30th at midnight. That's the shot clock. That's when government no longer is funded if we do not take some additional action. I said to somebody this morning, there are 535 of us, presumably we're all adults, presumably we're all rational people. Neither side would agree that everybody is that, but the fact of the matter is, and we don't do what we know we have to do. The only thing you have to do, you may want to do a lot of things, and we passed, from our perspective, very good legislation through this Congress, but the only thing you have to do is pass the 12 appropriation bills so you can fund the operations of government, or make a decision that you're not going to fund a department, a program, an activity, whatever. But we don't do that. And we have, unfortunately, the sense that the delay is an acceptable process, as the gentleman points out. And then you get to the last minute, a crisis, and then you get a big bill we call the omnibus bill that really it's so large and so few people have been participating in the formulation of that bill that it's unfair to the members of Congress, it's unfair to the American people. So I couldn't agree with the gentleman more that the appropriation process should be done. My own view is each bill should be considered individually. You started the practice, the Republicans started the practice. We followed the same practice of bundling them so we could save time. But I look forward to working with the gentleman. I'm going back to the Appropriations Committee, working with Chair DeLauro and the Ranking Member DeLauro on doing that. But to her credit, all 12 bills were reported out of committee in a timely fashion. And I would suggest, this is gratuitous, you didn't ask for this advice, but what I would have done if we could have done it is start the markups and finish the markups in June, start the markups in May, pass the bills in June, send them to the Senate, and have July and August and September to resolve differences between the two, and pass the bills by September 30th. That's what we ought to do. I agree with the gentleman. It's an objective that we ought to try to attain.
And I share the gentleman's concerns there. One of the reasons we put the calendar out for next year this early and built time in during those months before the summer so that there's ample time to get all 12 appropriations bills through the House, give the Senate time to do the work well in advance of the deadline, and then at some point the onus has to be on them to do the job that they have to do before the midnight hour. And I'd yield to the gentleman.
One of the things, I've been on the Appropriations Committee, I was on it for 23 years before I took leave. We had actual conferences. Senators and House members on the two subcommittees came together, discussed differences, tried to resolve those differences. That essentially does not exist any longer, and it's I think, not healthy for the institution.
And it's a good suggestion. That's something that we can get back to hopefully in the new year, try to make this process work better. But I appreciate, again, we'll have this conversation more next week. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.